And we are honored to have Fred Williams here today. He's the lead software engineer that's worked on numerous high visibility projects, including Caterpillar's off-highway GPS tracking products. He's currently the co-host with Doug McBurney on the popular Real Science radio program that airs every Friday at 3 p.m. and 670 a.m. KLTT. It's a 50,000 watt blowtorch in Denver that gets the message out. He's also served as the webmaster for the Creation Research Society, which is the oldest one in America. And so it's quite a blessing to have Fred Williams with us. Take it away, Fred.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, that last movie by Mike Snedley, that was excellent. I hadn't seen that before myself. You know, there is another judgment coming. Like I say, I believe in the Big Bang. It just hasn't happened yet. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My talk is on the usefulness of geophysics models. This was the first paper solicited to hydroplate.org. So we encourage everyone to, we need more papers to go on our website and to be submitted. So I'll go through that particular paper. As Brian mentioned, I'm the co-host with Doug McBurney on Real Science Radio. You can find us at rsr.org. And we've always got, summary information of all our shows that we do weekly. That's most of our audience is audio, but we did recently start a YouTube channel this summer, and that's been going well as we build our audience. And you can find that at youtube.com at Real Science Radio. Okay, so this talk examines the usefulness of the three geophysics model types. And those are seismic tomography, which is a picture of the entire globe, basically. A lot of times that's what you're getting, what you can get with seismic tomography. It's a bigger view. Seismic imaging is shallow subsurface, such as reflection imaging. This is used a lot by the oil and gas industry. And then finally, forward modeling, which is modeling things like plate motion. So real quickly, I wanted to share this joke that I found on a geophysicist website. So this comes from a geophysicist professor at a college, and he asked this. He said, the boss asked a geologist, an engineer, and a geophysicist into his office. He asked each of them the same question. What is 2 plus 3? The engineer answers 5.0000. The geologist answers somewhere between 4 and 6. And the geophysicist leans close to the boss and answers quietly, what would you like it to be? So it's interesting, geophysicists tell this joke themselves, and it does reveal the truth behind the difficulties in their in the world they live in. So I do want to make this clear. This is not a slam. This talk is not a slam on geophysics. Geophysics is a credible field with powerful engineering technology. Geophysics engineering is a challenging field with high levels of competency that produces useful results. I have family and friends that are geophysics engineers, and they do a lot of impressive work. So I don't want this talk to come off as a slam on geophysics, but it is going to be highly critical of some aspects of it, and especially how models are oversold. Okay, so quickly, a brief rundown of plate tectonics. This talk only deals with the modeling aspect. The talk that follows this, you'll get to hear more about the problems with plate tectonics. So basically, I like Jane Albright's paraphrasing from a secular geophysicist that the ocean floors come and the ocean floors go. This is the bottom line of plate tectonics. Wikipedia starts off by saying plate tectonics is the scientific theory that Earth's lithosphere comprises a number of large tectonic plates which have been slowly moving since about 3.4 billion years ago. Let's make no mistake about it. Plate tectonics is an old Earth paradigm. It fits with their particular paradigm that's a direct assault on Genesis. And it's interesting that Wikipedia mentions 3 billion years when most geophysicists will tell you that it's 215 million years of plate movements that they've noticed. So anyways, we're going to consider the usefulness of the geophysics modeling that many of you probably have seen, mostly from Dr. John Baumgartner. And so why is this important? So geophysics modeling is used as major evidence for secular plate tectonics, and mostly I'm referring to things like seismic tomography. Geophysics modeling is the primary evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics. Now, what do I mean by that? Because you may get some CPT people object, say, well, no, it's built on top of observational evidences. But the bottom line is CPT is built on top of plate tectonics. And then from there, they separate themselves by saying it happened catastrophically to fit it in to a young Earth framework. But they will cite evidences for CPT that are the same exact evidences for secular plate tectonics. So what are models? So, everybody has an idea in their head of what a model is. You could have a model car, some prototype model that maybe was envisioned for the moon. We got this mock-up of a mechanical model on Back to the Future. Some people may think of people as models. I show this because this guy here, Nick, he's my son's best friend, and he's actually a young Earth creationist. So that's kind of cool. This was on North Face's homepage. Okay, so we're really talking about software modeling, not the modeling that I showed you before. So things like MRIs and CAT scans, they use within this product, there's software modeling that takes the images of individuals. And we'll get into a little bit more about how software modeling works, but I'm not going to get into too many details on that. Okay, then there's models such as creating houses or, maybe truss structures or trusses in houses. My son worked at a company that used finite element analysis, and he was a team lead of one of the development teams there. And they use that kind of software. They use software modeling. You can consider a flight simulator is a type of software model. You've got at Micron, where I work, I was the team lead for 3 years of roughly 7 to 10 engineers, and we modeled the NAND that operates inside of this solid state drive. You have finite element analysis, and then you have things like John Baumgartner's Terra model. And so these are what we're going to talk about. Computer model types are all at the core of all of these models, simulators, population models, climate models, computational fluid dynamics. At the core is the software and the mathematics. So there's two major types of modeling. There's forward modeling, and that's where you have a whole bunch of input parameters. You put it into the model, and then you get some sort of predicted or simulated outcome. And then you have inverse modeling, where you already have the observed data, and then you reverse that and come up with what the input looked like. So examples of forward modeling would be things like simulators, finite element analysis, climate models, population genetic models, and geodynamic models such as Baumgartner's Terra and Mabul. Inverse modeling would include MRIs, CAT scans, and seismic tomography and seismic reflection imaging. So George Box made this statement some time ago, and it's held for, since he made it, and it's universally true. As an engineer who's done modeling at Micron and some modeling at other companies, I've found no exception to this. All models are wrong, but some are useful. And so this talk is going to examine the usefulness again of the geophysics models that are used by both creationists and secular scientists. The ones I'm going to focus on are two types of inverse modeling, seismic tomography and seismic imaging, and then I'll also take a look at forward modeling. Okay, so seismic tomography. This type of inverse modeling looks at earthquake waves, and it's more of a deep surface analysis. It's more of a large surface area, and most of it is in academia. Seismic imaging uses similar principles, but it is different. There's a controlled wave source, such as a seismic hammer or explosions. It has a shallow surface analysis, a tighter surface area, and it's primarily used by the oil and gas industry, as they look for natural resources. Okay, so here's some examples of some seismic tomography images to give you an idea of big picture things that it's looking at, more gross structures. And I'll mention this one right now. This is, actually, I'll get to this one later. Okay, seismic wave output is much more prone to inaccuracy than CAT scans or MRI scans due to a litany of factors, and these include, you have coarse data coverage. With seismic tomography, you're looking at a big picture, and you have only so many earthquakes and only so many detectors around the globe. Curved wave paths. So as waves travel through the earth, they're going to run into different things that'll make the waves curve. Different properties, different materials, various densities, things like that. And the Earth's subsurface just isn't uniform. You've got ambiguous source location. Do we really know the exact location of where the earthquake occurred? That's part of the educated guesswork. There's high variation in properties such as permeability and density. And this will be a huge one that we're going to get into even more detail later. The limited model validation. That's pretty big. So seismic tomography problems are ill-posed. What does that mean? There can be multiple subsurface models that explain the observed seismic data equally well. This is a quote from the Geophysics Journal International. It is well known that seismic tomography is an ill-conditioned inverse problem due to limited illumination of the medium. In other words, a limited view of what this thing's imaging. It's not like an MRI or CAT scan where you have a much more dense area. Borehole data as constraints is therefore essential for the important task of producing seismic images that tie the well. And we'll talk about the fact that, what kind of borehole data do we have? Okay, this is an interesting from a blog from two geophysicists. We seismologists, however, make countless choices, approximations, and assumptions which are limited by poor data coverage and ultimately never fit our data perfectly. These things are often overlooked or taken for granted and poorly communicated. Inevitably, this undermines the rigor and usefulness of subsequent interpretations in terms of heat or material properties. So this is important to note too. And you can find this all over published papers. Independent analysis yields different results. So from one paper, this guy reported that 20 independent geophysicists analyzed seismic data from subsurface faults in the Hoop area in the southwestern Barents Sea. There was considerable variation in interpretation. And then another study in China of 5 seismic models of the Chinese mainland. Large discrepancies exist between the models. Okay, so we just talked about seismic tomography. Now we're going to talk about seismic reflection that deals with a more dense, concentrated area. They have a controlled wave source. Again, this might be explosions, seismic hammers, seismic vibrators, etc. And then they've got different receivers and things. In this particular case, they've got hydrophones that receive the shock waves. And this is a survey ship looking for natural resources beneath the ocean. And this is heavily used by the oil and gas industry, and it usually produces an output something like this. It takes a lot of work to get to this, and they'll often try to use borehole data to improve the accuracy. Despite the better technology and the tighter area, it's interesting that it's still a very difficult task. This is from the chief technical officer for Geoplat AI. He said this: the success rate of oil and gas drilling operations remains low, even after implementing expensive technical analysis and procedures. And, one of the peer reviewers questioned this and at ICC, and they later responded in a subsequent email that said, well, okay, I checked with one of my sources in the geophysics community, and well, it's not as good as I thought. It was 30%, but he still thought, well, 30% is pretty good. Okay, well, yeah, maybe it's pretty good, but nevertheless, with all that technology, you're only having a 30% success rate. And that rate is probably conflated because you're going to have cases where you're going to hit oil regardless. I mean, you kind of already know that there's already been some evidence that you're in an area where you're going to find what you're looking for. Okay, so now let's look at this is an example of Germany's KTP borehole, which reached, at the time, I think it was the deepest hole drilled into the earth. It reached 5.6 miles. And they had seismic reflection imaging beforehand. And here's the quotes from the paper that was written after the drilling. The geologic starting model, again, the seismic reflection model, proved to be inaccurate. So now we can look, and guess what? It proved to be inaccurate. And another quote, a highly unexpected result confirmed by a number of independent observations. So even when you can look at it, these models are proving to have problems. So which is more reliable between the two I just talked about, seismic tomography or seismic imaging? So with seismic tomography, we already saw there's a limited seismic network. With seismic imaging, you have concentrated seismic waves. You have a much better chance of having a more accurate model. Weaker constraints. So seismic tomography has fewer constraints. There's not a lot. The earthquake location, there's uncertainty there. And most of the time, Rarely do they have any borehole data to try to use as a feedback mechanism to improve their constraints. Seismic imaging does have better constraints. Seismic tomography is limited to academia. And, I don't want this to sound like a slam on academia. They serve a purpose, but facts are facts, and they have limited technology. They have less experience, lower accountability. And what I mean by that is in the oil and gas industry, there's going to be dedicated test teams of many engineers, and there's accountability to producing results. It could be your livelihood by how well you're able to produce. In college, there's just less of that type of accountability. In academia, they have very limited, in many cases, no validation. And in the industry, you're going to have better validation because you've got dedicated teams to do that. You have lower quality of data in seismic tomography. You have less data coverage. You have longer paths, which means more noise can impact it. And the accuracy and resolution decrease with depth. That's a known problem with seismic tomography. Seismic imaging, you have higher quality of data, you have more data, shorter paths, shallower depths, and tighter surface area. And really, we're going to find out an Achilles heel is there's the validation. It's almost none with tomography, and it's extremely limited with seismic imaging. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail. So many of you probably remember, if you're old enough, Ronald Reagan saying the famous phrase, trust but verify, when talking about the Soviet Union. With seismic tomography, we can't verify that these things are accurate. Why do we trust it? And I think too often these things get oversold. And a geophysics friend of mine that reviewed my slides, he said, his answer was, we trust it because without it, we are completely blind to what's at depth. And at least seismic imaging of the earth gives a sense of gross structure. And that's, of course, there's definitely truth to that. It does give gross structure, but it's often oversold as giving detailed structure. And there's still assumptions made about the so-called gross structure. So given that between seismic tomography and seismic imaging, one is clearly more advantageous than the other. Which one is used to promote secular plate tectonics and catastrophic plate tectonics? You guessed it, it's the one that has less reliability, seismic tomography. So let's examine the secular and young earth creationist use of seismic tomography to defend plate tectonics. So at ICR, their resident geologist, Dr. Tim Clary, he makes it no bones about it. He's a big supporter of catastrophic plate tectonics. And we're going to look at a chapter in his book. And I've got his book right here, Carved in Stone. It's a book that I think is really good, but it has, to me, a huge blind spot in chapter 6, which is the whole chapter defends catastrophic plate tectonics. And so while overall it's a really good book, thorough documentation of mega sequences, and I recommend it to Creationist Library, but I disagree strongly with the chapter on plate tectonics. So here's some problems with it. So he shows this image right here. This is seismic tomography. Okay, so first problem is he's attributing the blue over here to cold. Let me go back to the image. This is cold and this is warm, but really this is just difference in speed velocity of the waves. That's what that really is. Here's from the USGS. Many factors affect the wave speed, including composition, crystal orientation, mineralogy, and phase, especially the presence of melt. Red anomalies may not really be hot, nor blue ones cold. So I'd rather have velocities be talked about here than cold and cooler, because that's an assumption that may or may not be true. The other objection I have is his reference. So I'm a little bit of a stickler. I do look up these references, and I went to look it up, and it's not a reference to that image. It's a reference to a study that produces these images. Okay. So which one of these two images provides a better illusion of plate subduction? This one clearly, if you look at this image here, which is provided in his book, that looks like a subducting plate. So to the unsuspecting, you're going to think, okay, yeah, that looks like evidence for plate subduction. But this is the actual image. Can you really make that deduction from this particular study here that, by the way, had no constraints listed to try to improve its accuracy? So he says that it's modern seismic tomography, but it's not. This particular study comes from 1997. Okay, and the technology has gotten better. It has no constraints. When this was an anonymous ICC reviewer strongly objected to this and said, oh, it does have constraints. It has the earthquake foci as a constraint. Well, then I went back to the paper that produced this image and I looked it up, and guess what? The earthquake foci were set as unknown parameters. That doesn't sound like they really knew where those were. So that was not a reasonable constraint. So essentially, it has no constraints to help improve the accuracy of the model. And again, I'm objecting because the article sourced in his book was to a 2014 study that had nothing to do with this image. I like what this candid admission in the Canadian Journal of Earth Sciences. Some end users put more confidence in attractive images in a way similar to the customer's reaction to an advertising campaign. Now, let me make it clear, I'm not questioning Clary's integrity at all. I really want to make that clear, but I believe his footnote should be corrected and perhaps change modern seismic tomography to simply seismic tomography. And it'd be nice to talk about the problems with tomography and how they're oversold. There's no way that this is what it looks like. Me as an engineer and knowing about validation and things like that, the odds of this being accurate are remarkably low. Okay, I did mention this one before. This is from a study that uses seismic tomography, and then they claim it's better constrained because they're using full wave inversion, which is an improvement in seismic tomography, but it still has limited constraints, has no borehole data to confirm it. But let's just run with this for a second and say, hey, this kind of maybe looks like what's underneath the surface. And by the way, the geophysics friend of mine said that this is way overselling. He said it's a classic case of overinterpretation, but he agrees there's no doubt there's blobs under there, but what do they really look like? We don't know. But can you really get from this image of this area here where there's supposedly a subducting plate, evidence of subduction? Even if you look at the paper, the authors note that the Caribbean slab dips from 30 degrees down to suddenly 90 degrees straight down. And then they attribute the steep dip of the Cocoa slab to greater age. Well, that's convenient. And then they say the slabs are in pieces and several are detached from the surface. And this is what I noted in the paper. It would be a tenuous and circular claim to stake this tomography as evidence for plate tectonics. You could take any flood model and you use this as evidence for your theory. Something that's evidence for every theory is not good evidence for any one theory. This is where you get into even more wild speculation. This image was used by Baumgartner in several papers that he's published, either through ICC or some of the creation journals. And this is a very, coarse view of some sort of blob underneath the surface of the Earth. And so CPT noted that the low velocity anomalies are attributed to warmer rocks. Okay, so admitting that the waves are just low velocity, but they're saying, okay, it's because they're warmer rocks. Well, that's an assumption. And then they make additional assumptions. This is them talking. The temperature differences between the warm and cold rocks are on the order of 3,000 to 4,000 Kelvin. So then this was listed by AIG as a prediction of catastrophic plate tectonics. However, it could not have been a prediction because geophysicists have known of these anomalies since the 1970s, before catastrophic plate tectonics was proposed. But nevertheless, there's problems with these blobs they see. There's one beneath Africa and the other beneath the Pacific Ocean. They're called low shear velocity provinces. Here's what the secular scientists say. Well, first of all, this is what I say. It relies on seismic tomography, so that's a strike against it right there. Here's what one geophysicist said. You not knowing the density leaves many doors open. The diversity of interpretations of this data throughout geophysics community highlights the difficulties in constraining mantle dynamics. Despite advances in analytical techniques and increased data volumes, the causes of this structural complexity and links with mantle dynamics and plate tectonics remain open questions. It's interesting that you really don't see a lot of the secular community using this phenomenon, this blob that they've discovered, as evidence for plate tectonics. But for some reason, catastrophic plate tectonics proponents are using this as evidence. And I hope that I've conveyed here just how weak of evidence that is. And it's certainly not a prediction that CPT made. Okay, moving on. We're going to now look at forward modeling, and this is the type of modeling of geodynamic models that attempt to characterize plate movements. This is what you've possibly seen if you watched any of Baumgartner's presentations on how he believes catastrophic plate tectonics could work. Geodynamic forward modeling, there are secular models, Baumgartner's Terra model, and then his Mabua model that was an attempt to model erosion for sediment transport and deposition. Okay, so geodynamic forward modeling, there's enormous challenges. If you try to model anything, there's always a challenge. I think of the modeling we did at Micron for the NAND device or part that lives inside of solid state drives. We had a team of 7. We have a team of 40 engineers working on the SSD drive itself, and at least 20 to 30 in the validation department. And the complexity of the NAND, while it's pretty high in the grand scheme of things with man's created technology, it pales in comparison to the Earth. And if you just look at the fact that it's elastic and deforms regularly, there's vast variety of Earth materials. These materials in rheology, it's not well known. This comes from a secular source. This is one I added to my paper: synchronous and asynchronous external inputs that you have to consider in a model. Complexity is added by external inputs that may be synchronous. So in other words, things like the moon's gravity causing tides, that's a synchronous input, or many asynchronous inputs, for example, wind, water motion, erosion, chemical reactions, things that can happen at random. Okay, there's unknown equation state of parameters. You can read more details on all of these in my paper. Complex mathematics, I think that goes without saying. Plate motion driving mechanism, and here's a quote from a geophysicist: "It's questionable if any geodynamic theory adequately explains plate motion." And we'll talk about the problems with plate tectonics and plate motion in the next talk on the book on 20 reasons to question plate tectonics. Okay, we continue on. It's computationally intensive. You do need a lot of computer power to even generate these models. There's scant observational data. There's scant direct observational data of the Earth's subsurface, and that is definitely going to affect the ability to find a useful model. Determinism catch-22. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that. It's one that I mentioned in the paper, and basically, Baumgartner uses the finite element method, and which is deterministic. However, geodynamic processes are definitely non-deterministic. And so read my paper if you want more details. Determinism basically yields the same result given the same inputs. It makes life easier if you're trying to test something. Conversely, non-determinism is a property whereby the same inputs can produce different results. Okay. Now we're getting to the Achilles heel of why geodynamic modeling should not be accepted as any sort of data point in making any kind of decision about evidence. You cannot validate it. It's the type of validation they have is not robust. It's not the type of validation that the industry requires to even get a product approved to be developed. It's the elephant in the room. This is a typical testing progression. I'm not going to go to the details. You can find that in the paper. But basically, seismic tomography and geodynamic forward modeling cannot possibly do any of this type of testing. It's not possible with the Earth. You can only drill so far into the Earth, and even when you do, those are proven inaccurate. And it's like, even if you've got a small, say you're trying to go 20 miles into the surface, the biggest we've ever drilled is like 7 miles, I believe. So that would be just a pinprick of like an MRI or a CAT scan, and you want to confirm this thing that you see, and then you can surgically confirm whether or not it's there. You cannot do that with geodynamic modeling or with seismic imaging. So I mentioned MRIs. Those can be tested, and I use the term black box testing loosely. It's a term used in software engineering, but it's the ability to actually confirm something works. This building a truss, you can have further validation by mechanical engineers and examining the site. This was a product we developed at Ceridian BCT for blood circulation that had a huge team of test developers to confirm it. Flight simulators, you can confirm to some degree its ability to function properly, even though they cause problems and can mislead, and they're definitely not a way to get qualified for flying, but there is a way to at least validate it. I mentioned already Micron. We have a dedicated team to writing a black box test to validate this by providing data in, confirming the data comes out, applying all kinds of pressure, heat, and different kinds of scenarios to try to get it to fail. We have to deal with things like even like quantum tunneling, which can cause errors, and we have to have elaborate error correction technology. All of that can be black box tested. Same with finite element analysis. But what can't be black box tested? Baumgartner's model or any kind of geophysics model. It can't be done. And it's a huge problem. Now, Baumgartner, I believe, might be aware of this to some degree, so he tries to he tries to maybe get around it. I'm not sure. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but this is from one of his papers on modeling of large-scale erosion. He said the equations commonly used to model such flows are anchored in experimental measurements and decades of validation in many diverse applications. No problem with that. I would totally buy into the fact that the equations and the mathematics and the libraries that are used by software have been validated. I can say the same thing about all the libraries that we use and all the different the companies and products I've worked on, but that doesn't validate the product itself. This does not validate his model. It only validates a subset of his model, just like a library that we use for mathematics in our GPS systems at Trimble for the Caterpillar devices. Those were well vetted over many years of use, but that does not validate the model. At the 2021 presentation at Midwest Creation Fellowship, where Baumgartner spent pretty much 90% of his talk trying to validate his Mabul model and explaining the mile deep sediments around the globe, his only evidence is a model, and that's very questionable. He defended the validation of the model by appealing to its output, saying that it closely matched what has been observed with global sediments. Sure would love for him to elaborate on that, but even so, that's not validation. That's the lowest level of validation, and it has single user bias, and it can become easily circular. It would never be accepted in the industrial world. Okay, I'm going to pile on a little bit here. We're going to look at another serious problem that many of you may know about already. CPT, these models to generate plate movements, they rely on at least 5 miracles. And these are documented in the paper. I'm not going to go through them here, but many of you may be familiar with them. This miracle here, he's retracted, which is good because he claimed that there was a second moon that came around to help provide the energy to erode, the continents to get the sediment record the way it looks, because he admits there's a huge problem there. He now totally relies on his Mabul model that relies on those other miracles. So this is not a good way to defend a model, is to insert miracles into it.
Lord, it's a miracle.
So a clip from Shawshank Redemption, maybe the most watched movie in history, who knows? And unfortunately, hopefully Mike Snavely's movie will get watched a lot, because that was fantastic. If anybody missed it, please check that out. It'll be listed on the website. Okay, so the National Center for Science Education. These are enemies to creation, and they have a lot of fake news, and they promote a lot of fake science. But I argue that they're absolutely correct in their article that they wrote about John Baumgartner's model. It was documented in U.S. News and World Report. An article was published about it in that magazine, and NCSC came out with an article refuting it. And I challenge anybody, if you want, go read the article. I find no issues with their article. Just like if you have some other theory that's not valid, there are times, we can't just deny when the secular community points out something that's a serious flaw. In this case, miracles in, creationism out. To me, it's an embarrassment. We were embarrassed by the vapor canopy theory, and it took years to get rid of that from creation paradigm. We're in the same boat, in my view, with catastrophic plate tectonics. Someone looks at this with an open and clear mind, and they're going to see that miracles are used to get this to work. Okay, so in the industrial world, modeling virtually never dictates moving forward on a project. I've been the team lead of many projects and the architect of several high-end and high visibility projects. And I'm not aware of a single case. Now, we did have modeling involved in some products, but modeling was never used as a decision-making point. And modeling with validation, where you could actually validate the model, it can have limited usefulness, but even there, you're not going to have a model dictate whether or not a product moves forward. A model that does not have proper validation, like if you use seismic tomography, or even worse, you use Baumgartner's model that relies on miracles, neither one would ever be considered as even a single data point moving forward on a project, if you can't validate it. They would be too unreliable. It's something that it's a problem with an aspect of geophysics that you can't just, say that that's all we got. It's a problem you just can't get rid of. It can't be denied. So geophysicists claims that geodynamic models provide useful information on mantle flow. It's classic circular reasoning. I did want to mention this model that Baumgartner did with Dr. Sanford and Walter Riemein. Walter Riemein and I interacted quite a bit back in the day. He's a brilliant engineer. And they did a really good work on this Mendel's accountant. To Baumgartner's credit, he uses expertise on this, and I think they came up with a useful model. However, there is a bad part of this model. I'm going to talk about the bad first and then the good next, and it will illustrate a point I'm going to try to make about modeling. So Mendel's account, the bad. The authors make a questionable assertion on the model's usefulness as a, quote, capable research tool that can be applied to problems in human genetics, plant and animal breeding, and management of management of endangered species. So my challenge is this: provide me a single example where this model proved useful in a real world scenario. And I have a feeling that the ICR would be on board with me on this because of their work with continuous environmental tracking. Their model, Baumgartner's model here, I think he's taking his subconscious view of his geophysics model and then applying it here and thinking it's capable to as a research tool for forward modeling. It's not at all. It's not useful at all in the regard they're claiming here. If you consider, for example, like comparing it to the complexity of geodynamic modeling, think about things like epigenetics and all these other things that impact how things actually happen as a population grows. There's so many factors. There's an ongoing healthy debate between creationists, especially between ICR and I believe Creation Ministries International, on the role of natural selection. And Randy Galuzza and others at ICR want us to get away from relying so heavily on natural selection. And I agree with them. I think their take has much more engineering principles involved. And it makes the odds of this model successfully being able to use in human genetics, plant and animal breeding, there's no way. I question that. But here's the good with that model. It really did achieve a good and a usefulness. This is, I believe, from their conclusion, or perhaps in the abstract, I don't recall, but the quote: if one uses parameters corresponding even in a crude sense to observed biological reality, then Mendel always shows genetic deterioration, not genetic improvement. I think they're being kind here. You can use really gross, favorable assumptions for evolution, and you still get loss of information, genetic deterioration. It always shows that. In this regard, it becomes a powerful argument against evolution. And so this is something what physicist Richard Feynman said that has a lot of truth to it. In the natural physical sciences, it is difficult, some might say impossible, to prove a proposition to be true. But on the other hand, it is quite possible to prove that which is false. So what Baumgartner and Sanford achieved here was Mendel's accountant. This model shows it's pretty useful, and another nail in the coffin as to why neo-Darwinism is wrong. Now, the Terra model, I could argue it actually shows, because you need miracles to make it work, the plate tectonics is wrong. But it's not a powerful model that I wouldn't even go that far. But if it was going to have a usefulness, there it is. Because you have to use miracles to get it even to produce the output you want, that means the model isn't producing, it's not evidence for your theory. Therefore, plate tectonics is wrong. Terra plus miracles, CPT is rescued. That's highly questionable. Again, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I want to give grades on this. I think seismic imaging, the usefulness is okay. I mean, they are increasing their odds of finding natural resources. Seismic tomography, I don't want to say totally it has no usefulness, because there is some. You do get like very gross images of pieces of data that you can kind of, okay, there's something there. But the problem is it gets oversold big time, way oversold. And then geodynamic modeling has low or no usefulness. I know, again, in my industry, it would never be used as even a single data point in deciding on a product's viability, or whether or not you move forward on it. And the big Achilles heel with both of these last two is the inability to validate them. They all have that problem, but it's worse with geodynamic modeling. There's no way you can test that thing in the way that we expect things to be tested to validate them. They cannot be reasonably validated. Okay, my conclusion is this. Creationists should not readily accept seismic tomography as truth. Again, and if you think about it, seismic tomography is almost exclusively from secular sources. Most of it comes from academia, where you have lower standards, less technology. And so when things like an ocean is discovered miles beneath the surface under somewhere, we have to understand there's plenty of speculation involved, because even us as creationists will say, oh, look, this supports one theory or another. I've even heard that it used for Walt Brown's theory, which of course I support. I believe it has the most evidence for it. But we are too quick to accept things like seismic tomography. We have to realize the weaknesses of that type of technology. It's nowhere near as accurate as like an MRI or a CAT scan, and it cannot be validated, which just makes it totally real close to the arrow of complete uselessness. You certainly couldn't use it in a court of law. Imagine a court of law where you can't validate a claim that somebody makes. Just think how badly this would be shot down using seismic tomography if there's like a life or death, or you're trying to prove the innocence or guilt of someone. When it comes to geodynamic forward modeling, it's even worse. It should be completely rejected as evidence for any flood model. And yet, unfortunately, this is one of the primary arguments given for plate tectonics, or for catastrophic plate tectonics. I believe many of us were, perhaps because we don't know about modeling, I don't want to say fooled, because it sounds like there is deception involved, and there isn't. I believe that it's just a misuse and overselling and not understanding modeling. And I think people get wooed by, Baumgartner himself is a brilliant engineer. He's a brilliant scientist. There's nobody who questions that. And so then, because he's got a PhD and he was featured in U.S. News and World Report, it becomes compelling to say, hey, this is good evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics. But guys like me who use modeling in the real world, it's not evidence. And I hate to be so almost dramatic in my statements, but we need to stop using this as evidence for any flood model. Geodynamic forward modeling has way too many assumptions and problems to make that to lead to those kind of conclusions. It's way oversold. So that's the end of my talk. I do believe we need to work closer as a young Earth creation community. There does seem to be a gap between geologists and geophysicists and the engineering community, and it's not their fault. We're all at fault we need to work closer so that things like this don't end up becoming a major paradigm in young Earth creationism. So that's the end of my talk, and I appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you so much, Fred. Man, boy, you hit the ball out of the park there. Oh my goodness. Trust but verify. I like that. And they have a real hard time verifying that. I'm so glad you put all the research into that. I mean, just think of everybody who's watching. Just think how much you learned right there. It would have spent me days to figure that out. And Fred just put it right there on a silver platter, and now we can hit it. And he hit it out of the park. And let's see, we only have a couple of minutes left. There was somebody that quoted on the borehole. They said it was 5.5 miles in Germany. There's another one in Russia, and I think you're right. It is about 7 miles, and just phenomenal. phenomenal information.
And just another point that I didn't make there is the expense of drilling is $200,000 to $800,000 a day just to even do the drilling that they do. So it'd be very difficult to validate even the seismic imaging just with the enormous cost involved.
280,000 a day.
$200,000 to $800,000 a day expense.
200 to
drilling
800.
hole, yeah, in the drilling.
$200,000 to $800,000 a day. How far can they go in a day? Do you know?
That I don't know.
Oh, okay. Wow. It's
Yeah,
always
you wonder
fun.
how many days it takes them to do it.
Oh yeah, it's always fun spending other people's money, I guess. Boy, oh boy, that was wonderful. Let's see. And you're pretty, let's see. I got a couple of minutes. Yeah, I'm going to promote that. Or does anybody have, are you any other closing comments? We just got a minute or two left, Fred. You're good?
Yeah, I'm good. And I
Okay.
guess I'll be presenting the next.
Thank you for doing that paper and submitting it. Praise God for that. So we'll see. Oh, that's another thing. If anybody, if you guys just want to type in and say which creation organization do you think is going to jump on is going to accept the hydroplate first? Do you think it'll be Answers in Genesis or CMI, Creation Ministries International, or ICR, or which one do you think will jump in there? You can feel free to put that in the comments, and maybe we'll get a poll and we'll see which organization do we think is the most open-minded, and that'll be kind of fun. And then again,
so Brian, Pete Moore has a question. Has John allowed independent code review of his CPT software? I believe he has, because there's others, the mechanical engineer from Mississippi State, who's a professor down there. What's his name? He was at the ICC conference. I know they work on that. They've done work with that model. So I'm not worried about the code review on his model. That is a part of the testing process, but it's the part that it's not as critical by any stretch as black box validation and the type of validation after that. So I don't have a problem with the code itself. I wouldn't. Right. Me personally, I can assume the code is 100% accurate as far as how well it's written and not any bugs or this and that, and the model would still not be accepted.
Right. Oh yeah. The whole, yeah, I agree. Well, we got 9 minutes too. People can take a break, and you can do your Christmas shopping right now. Get this grant. No, I got the wrong one. That's right. I got to buy it. Go into Mike Snavely's Mission Imperative and get all your Christmas shopping done today. Get that video. It's the best one that I've seen, and give it to your friends or your parents, your kids, your grandkids, your pastors, and just pass it out like crazy. And your Christmas shopping is done. Again, let's vote with our money. Let's support the people that are moving the creation ball forward, and let's avoid the stuff that's really not going to matter in 100 years.